My friends, what just happened for the Detroit Lions at pick 17 says everything about where this franchise is heading, and honestly, this might be one of the smartest and cleanest first-round decisions Brad Holmes has made in years. With the 17th pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, Detroit selected Blake Miller, right tackle. And for Lions fans who understand how this team wins football games, this pick should feel absolutely perfect. This was not about making a flashy move. This was not about chasing headlines. This was about fixing the foundation of the offense and putting this team right back where it belongs, among the best offensive lines in football. Blake Miller comes in with 54 college starts. Let that sink in for a second. 54 starts. That is not a projection pick. That is not a developmental gamble. That is a player who has been doing this at a high level for 4 straight years and arrives in Detroit already looking like one of the most plug-and-play prospects in the entire class. He was a freshman All-American and has shown consistency from the very beginning of his college career. That matters. And what makes this even bigger is the domino effect this creates for the entire offensive line. This move allows Penei Sewell to shift to left tackle, which feels like the natural long-term answer. Many people forget that Sewell played left tackle in college and even showed early in his NFL career that he could handle that responsibility. The Lions had been protecting the structure before by keeping Taylor Decker there, but now the message is clear. This is Sewell's line, and left tackle is where he belongs. That changes everything. Now you have Sewell on the left side, where he can dominate both in pass protection and in the run game, and Blake Miller steps in on the right side as an elite pass protector. And in today's NFL, that matters more than ever because edge rushers are no longer attacking only the blind side. Many of the league's best pass rushers are lining up over the right tackle, specifically to attack that side. If you do not have strong protection there, your offense suffers immediately. Detroit understood that. Last season, Blake Miller played 529 pass blocking snaps and allowed only 14 pressures. The year before, 579 pass blocking snaps and only 18 pressures. He has never allowed more than 2 sacks in a season. That is elite level consistency. When you're talking about over 500 pass blocking snaps and that little pressure allowed, that is not luck. That is real NFL ready talent, and physically, he checks every box. He has the athletic profile, the strength, and the kind of bench press numbers that jump off the page. 32 reps with long arms is no joke. For a player with his frame, that tells you exactly what kind of power he brings. This is not just a technician. This is someone built to survive and win in the trenches immediately. Some fans wanted Monroe Freeling, and that conversation is fair. Freeling was highly respected, and many had him as OT1 in that range. But Blake Miller being the choice actually makes more sense because of the direct fit. Freeling may have had the higher athletic upside for some evaluators, but Miller gives Detroit the cleanest immediate solution at right tackle while freeing Sewell to take over the left side. That combination may actually be better for the full structure of the line, and suddenly, the entire offseason makes sense. Larry Borom now becomes a swing tackle and depth piece instead of being forced into a long-term answer role. Juice Scruggs fits better as interior depth. Cade Mays helps stabilize the inside. Christian Mahogany continues developing. Ratledge brings strong run blocking. Instead of asking too much from backups, Detroit is now building real depth across the line. That is how great teams operate. Last year, watching the offensive line struggle was painful. It was not a disaster, but it was clear the unit was aging and losing its dominance. Taylor Decker and Graham Glasgow were battling inconsistency, and for the first time in a while, there were real questions about whether this group could still be the strength of the team. Now, those questions are disappearing fast. This line suddenly feels younger, stronger, and far more athletic. It feels balanced again. It feels like the version of Detroit football that fans fell in love with. The version where 4th and 1 felt automatic, where Jared Goff had time, where the offense controlled games because the line controlled everything, because that is the truth of this team. When Jared Goff has protection, he is elite. Give him time, and he can carve defenses apart. This offense does not need magic. It needs structure. It needs protection. And Blake Miller helps restore exactly that. And maybe the best part of all of this is the financial side. Rookie contracts across multiple offensive line spots mean Detroit is not overspending to stay elite. Sewell is paid, but players like Miller, Mahogany, Ratledge, and Cade Mays give the Lions years of cost-controlled stability. That matters when you are trying to keep a championship window open. This is why the pick feels so right. It may not be the loudest draft selection, but it might be the one that matters most when we get to December and January football. The Lions did not chase hype. They rebuilt the wall in front of their quarterback, and honestly, that might be the move that defines the 2026 season. So now the big question for Lions fans is this: do you believe Blake Miller was the perfect pick at 17, or would you still have preferred Detroit to go in a different direction? And that is where this gets even more interesting, because once you accept that Blake Miller was the right move at pick 17, the entire conversation immediately shifts to one thing: what happens next in round 2? Because now, for the first time in this offseason, Lions fans can actually breathe and say it: the offensive line is no longer the emergency. That changes everything about how Brad Holmes can attack the rest of this draft. Before this pick, there was real tension around right tackle. There were questions about whether Larry Borom could truly be the long-term answer there, whether the team was asking too much from depth pieces, and whether protecting Jared Goff would become a serious issue if the line slipped even more. Now that pressure is gone. Blake Miller steps in, Penei Sewell moves left, and suddenly Detroit is back in the conversation for having one of the best offensive lines, not just in the NFC North, but in the entire NFL. And honestly, if Miller becomes even a solid starter, tell me a better offensive line in the division. It is hard to do. You have Sewell at left tackle, Christian Mahogany continuing to develop inside, Ratledge bringing power in the run game, Cade Mays stabilizing the interior depth, and now Miller locking down right tackle. Add in Borom as a true swing tackle instead of a forced starter, and that is exactly how championship teams build protection. That matters because the Lions know exactly who they are. This is not a team trying to survive with chaos. This is a team built on control. Strong offensive line, strong run game, efficient quarterback play, and a defense that can close games late. Detroit does not need to be flashy. They need to be dominant in the trenches. That is why this pick feels so Detroit. And there is another part of this that fans should not ignore. Brad Holmes did not panic. Every year there is pressure to make the exciting pick. Fans want the surprise name, the splash selection, the headline player. We have seen Holmes shock people before. There were moments in past drafts where fans heard names and thought, wait, what are we doing? Jahmyr Gibbs was one of those moments. People questioned it immediately because David Montgomery was already there, and now nobody questions it. That is why this Blake Miller pick deserves trust. Sometimes the smartest move is the obvious move. Sometimes the best front offices are the ones willing to do the simple thing because it is the correct thing. Detroit needed a right tackle. A high-level right tackle was sitting there. They took him. That is good team building. And I love one detail about Miller that says a lot about the kind of player he is. He could have entered the draft last year. He had every opportunity to leave earlier, but he chose to return because he wanted a chance to compete for a national championship. Even when his team struggled, he kept playing. He stayed committed. That matters in Detroit. This coaching staff values toughness, reliability, and players who love football more than hype. They want guys who stay in the fight when things are not perfect. Blake Miller fits that identity perfectly. He is not just talented, he feels like a Lions player. And now, because of that, round 2 becomes incredibly dangerous for the rest of the league. Detroit can attack the best player available. Defensive line? Absolutely. Edge rusher? Makes sense. Cornerback depth? Also possible. Interior defensive disruption? Very realistic. The beauty of solving right tackle early is that now the Lions can be aggressive instead of desperate. That is when Brad Holmes is at his best. The Lions do not have to force a pick anymore. They can let the board come to them. That is how contenders draft. And let's be honest, this fan base understands offensive line value better than most. Detroit fans know what happens when the trenches are strong. We lived it. We watched those stretches where 4th and 1 felt automatic, where the offense stayed on the field because nobody could stop the line from creating 1 yard. That identity is coming back. That is why this selection should excite people more than some flashy skill position pick ever could. This is how you keep a championship window alive. This is how you protect your quarterback. This is how you make sure your offense does not collapse when the games matter most in January. Blake Miller may not have been the loudest name on draft night, but years from now, Lions fans might look back and say that was the moment Detroit fully rebuilt the foundation again. And if that happens, this first round will be remembered as a massive win. Now the focus turns to day 2, and Brad Holmes has a chance to make this class even stronger. If the Lions come out of round 2 with impact help on defense after already securing their future at right tackle, this draft could become one of the most important of this era. That is why fans should be excited right now. This was not just a safe pick. This was a statement. Detroit is still building fighting through the trenches, still protecting Jared Goff, still trusting the formula that made them dangerous in the first place. And honestly, that should scare the rest of the NFC. Because the truth is, this second round decision might end up being just as important as the first. And there is one reason why Lions fans should be paying very close attention to it. The balance of this roster is now sitting right in front of Brad Holmes. The offense feels protected again, but if Detroit wants to take the next step and truly push for a Super Bowl, the defense has to become the unit that finishes games, not just survives them. That is where this draft gets serious. When you look at the NFC and the teams Detroit has to go through, it is obvious. You are going to face quarterbacks who can punish mistakes. You are going to face playoff offenses that do not give you second chances. If your pass rush disappears for even one quarter, your season can end fast. That is why edge rusher still feels like one of the biggest conversations heading into the next round. Even with talent already on the roster, you can never have enough pressure players. The best teams rotate waves of pass rushers. They do not rely on one guy to save everything. They keep attacking for 4 quarters, and that is exactly what Detroit should be chasing. Imagine adding another violent, explosive edge defender to pair with what is already there. Suddenly the front becomes faster, fresher, and much harder to block late in games. That changes playoff football, and if the Lions do not go edge, interior defensive line makes just as much sense. People sometimes overlook how important interior pressure is, but ask any quarterback what ruins a game faster. Pressure off the edge or immediate collapse right in your face. Interior disruption changes everything. It destroys timing. It kills third downs. It forces mistakes. That is championship football, and this is why I keep coming back to how smart the Blake Miller pick was. Because without solving right tackle first, Detroit might have been forced into offense again. They might have had to spend another premium pick just trying to patch protection. Instead, now they can hunt impact. That is the difference between drafting to survive and drafting to dominate. There is also the cornerback conversation, and I know a lot of fans are watching that closely. In today's NFL, depth in the secondary is never optional. Injuries happen. Matchups matter. If you get into January and you cannot trust your corners against elite receivers, it becomes a major problem immediately. Adding another young defensive back with real upside could absolutely be on the table. But personally, if I am looking at where this team can become truly dangerous, I still start with pressure. Pressure makes coverage better. Pressure creates turnovers. Pressure wins playoff games. That is why so many elite teams continue investing in defensive fronts, even when it feels like they already have enough. They know there is no such thing as enough when January arrives. And what makes me confident in Detroit is that Brad Holmes understands that better than most. This front office does not draft for fantasy football headlines. They draft for January football. That is why Lions fans should trust the process here. You look back at what transformed this team, and it was never about chasing stars. It was about building a roster where every weakness got addressed before it became a crisis.